We're live, and this time, yes, the laptop caller is on. So hopefully this one should not abruptly end.
So, we are up to episode 3 of Homicide, Night of the Dead Living, and this is the first place where there's a deviation from the common episode guides you find online that tell you that episode 3 is Son of a Gun. But the reason that they tell you that is because that was actually the third one broadcast, but NBC multiple times over the course of the show fouled up the order of the episodes, mostly because they would have a little information on the video on the episode, and they would try to use that in a certain way to get ratings. So people who really didn't know much about the show would be the ones making decisions of such things, and they would say things like, oh, well, this episode has more action and some shooting and stuff, so we want that in like the rating sweeps periods, because we can really heavily promote it as being an action episode, and then we'll get higher ratings. So they sometimes did that with, screwed around with the order. The problem was, of course, with Homicide is a lot of the story goes episode to episode. It's a serial show, and so you mess up the story when you do that. But what they did with this actually is when they broadcast this episode as the 9th one of the season, and they put a little text caption at the beginning saying, "One hot night last September." So the idea was this happened before all these other episodes you've already watched. But I figured that watching these with Ben, that it would be better for him to watch it in the order that was the actual production order.
Because it relates to the previous episode. Quite a lot of it relates.
And without giving anything away, there's a huge plot development in the next episode, which is actually the 4th episode but was broadcast 3rd, that once you saw that, this episode, well, I mean, obviously they tried to bill it as a flashback, but it makes a lot more sense if you watch it in order. And yeah, so because it was good to watch this first, because I'll spoil only one thing, I promise, and that's that the uniformed police officer, Chris Thorman, that was in this episode.
Yeah.
And he was in the last one too, but in this one you got to know him a little bit better. There was a little bit more of him interacting with people and stuff before you get to what happens to him in the next episode, and that's all I'll say. not gonna give away what happens, but anyway. So when I saw that, when I was looking at what was billed as the 3rd episode, 3rd broadcast episode, I was like, oh wait, no, this isn't the next one. So then I had to go back and figure that out, and thankfully I did it in time to get Ben to be able to see the actual next episode in the story, which was Night of the Dead Living, which the reason the network didn't want to run that 1/3 is they thought only 3 episodes into the show that it was too different than the rest of the episodes, and that they basically thought it was too slow, and that so it just wouldn't, we're trying to generate interest in this new show. This is going to people are going to tune out because there's no action, and there's just nothing to draw in new viewers. This is the kind of thing that's like, once the show is established, you might show this as kind of a deviation from the typical plot.
There's more good lines in this. It is slow. There's more good lines in this episode than in the most overrated writer-director I've ever known in my life, Quentin Tarantino. The way people bang on about his dialogue, when like so many American TV shows have better dialogue. It's just that most American films don't have good dialogue as good as TV. But anyway, loads of good. But it was slow, but it had a lot of good lines in it.
All right. So a quick summary of what takes place. It takes place almost entirely in the squad room. There's only a few brief scenes anywhere else. And so, but it's a great episode for getting to know more of the characters, because you have a lot of dialogue. You have instances where they are kind of put into positions that are making them uncomfortable. they've got personal situations going on. It reveals a little bit more about the characters' families. You know, we learn a little bit more, like Cressetti has a daughter named Beatrice, and we learn Kay has a sister named Carrie who has possibly cancer. And we learn Bo Felton. I don't remember if in the first 2 episodes he mentioned his wife. So if not, then we learned that he's got a wife and kids in this episode. And Pimbleton tells a kid that he's not married, but that may not be true. We'll have to stay tuned and see what what's revealed about that.
And has no kids either.
Yeah, he said he doesn't, not married, no kids. Some of that may be true, but anyway, Pimbleton seems to have his own reasons for saying things or not saying things. And again, now that I've learned as I have about the artisan temperament, sometimes you don't really have to have a reason. Sometimes it's just fun.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
Yeah.
Reason?
So I always related so much to Pimbleton, but in the beginning, of course, you know, it took me a while to kind of learn the character. So I don't think I actually had like an instant camaraderie with him in terms of like, it wasn't like an instant connection, like, oh, that guy's so much like me from the very beginning. It was more as he opened up later on and started to talk more about his own perceptions of things that I started to see we have a very similar take on a lot of stuff. And that was before, you know, I knew anything about personality theory. So I just knew it as, well, this is just a character that I understand where he's coming from. And then when I read all that stuff later, then it, you know, it became more and more clear that, you know, there's a reason for that. But anyway, episode in the squad room, you know, there's a bunch of little things going on, but as far as the actual plot, the air conditioner is not working, so it's hot. The regular daytime shifters are working the night shift. That would be something that was consistent over the years, that they established that they did have periods where they alternated shifts, where the day shift was working the night shift and vice versa. So they're doing that. There's the mystery of who's lighting the candle in the squad room every night. They find a baby. G finds the baby in the basement when he goes down to try to turn the air conditioning on, and the baby turns out to be the baby of the temporary cleaning lady. So social services lady comes and takes the baby, but then they're able to get him back later on once they find out who his mother is. So of course, the baby being present, you know, there's sort of takes from each person about kids and whether they have kids or not and what their experiences are with kids. And meanwhile, Cressetti's daughter is having her boyfriend sleep over, and Cressetti's not too fond of that idea. And
how old is his daughter?
They don't actually say in the episode how old she is.
It's kind of important.
Yeah, they imply that she's teenage, but they don't like specify her exact age.
It's pretty important, because then the audience can have their own feelings about.
Yeah,
Cressetti.
well, I guess it's sort of another thing that separates Homicide from some shows, and that they sort of leave that open to your interpretation because they leave the dialogue realistic, which is that he wouldn't necessarily say her age to any of the characters because they probably either already know or they just, you know, just didn't strike him to mention it.
But you see, if they'd have read Robert McKee, they would know that you can use exposition if you turn exposition into ammunition.
Well,
so we're like, look, she's only just turned 17.
Yeah. I don't think it's that they didn't know they could do that. It's just they chose not to.
Yeah, fair enough, because they probably heard other programs using
that. And part
that.
of it is they may not have decided yet. That's the thing is it's better to be less specific, and then when you cast the daughter later on, you can decide then how old she is versus sticking yourself with an age and then having a limitation when you're doing that later. So that's the thing with, you know, like for instance, Bo hasn't said anything about what his wife looks like or his kids. He hasn't even specified, I don't think, how many kids he has or whether they're male or female.
Felton. Is that Crissetti's partner? Oh, Felton,
Howard's
right?
partner.
Felton.
Yeah.
Right.
So you have some revealed in this, but you also have enough details left out that at that point they may not have decided which of these characters that are talked about off screen, will actually make on-screen appearances, and they haven't pigeonholed themselves into who they're going to cast in those roles. So that's a factor as well. But anyway, meanwhile, there is not a whole lot done with the Adina Watson case, but there's a few things. There's a continuation of G, telling Bayless, that he needs to get the respect of his fellow detectives, and expressing confidence in him being able to work the case and close the case. And then towards the very end of the episode, well, one of the recurring things is that there's this guy threatening to jump off a roof, of the roof of the building, who's dressed as Santa Claus, even though it's nowhere near Christmas time.
Yeah.
And after he gets apprehended, he escapes and actually falls through the roof of the squad room. And when that happens, it triggers Bayless thinking that the murder of Adina Watson could have brought her down to where she was found from the roof. And that leads he and Pimbleton to make the conclusion of where they think that she was killed. And so that leads them to...
Yeah, and they connected so well, you thought as if they might kiss each other. Out of joy.
I did not think that, but anyway,
I
so
might
that was
have
the sort of critical development in that part. But at the very end, G took everybody out on the roof and sprayed them with water hose. Oh, he kept telling Pimbleton to take off his tie. Another
that was
great
funny.
artisan moment. The Pimbleton probably would have taken off his tie, but he knew that it was bothering G, so he kept it on purpose.
Yeah, right. I've got some quotes here around that. You've got so you've got right near the start. You got G to Pemberton. Take that tie off. I'm sweating just looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got.
To me, the very best was when he said, "You need to learn to relax," and Pimbleton just responds with a big grin on his face. But I guess that was most of the plot that happened. The other thing was they revealed at the end that it was Munch that was indeed lighting the candle, and that was pretty much the end.
Yeah, and the reason why they didn't work out it was that one time the visiting uniformed officer lit it.
Yeah, lit it in.
Whilst Munch wasn't there. So
and then at the very end, the AC comes back on after they've already.
But I actually do believe, though, there are more good lines in here, this one episode, than there are in most. Than even in. I mean, like I said, if Quentin Tarantino had written these lines, people would be rattling them off and saying they were classics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just so we can go through them. So we've got. I like the editing when Munch was banging his table, and when he says "I hate women," and it was like it was the way it was cut together, the way that was edited. Bolander.
There's another thing that happened. Bolander, after talking about it for the last two episodes, finally asks Dr. Blythe out on a date.
Yeah, I got some lines about that. Bolander, Dr. Blythe and my ex are as different as Saturn and Pluto, and then Munch says, "Your head is in your anus."
Mm-hmm.
Then we've got Munch, and I'll put here ENTP. I'm upset because every relationship I think I have is not the relationship I actually have. And that's indicative of the problem that ENTPs can have with FI, is that they're not very good with feelings. The only downside to the episode, I think they established it was like on the radio, but I found the music annoying at times. And And it was
Yeah, that
like,
was another like stylistic choice that was interesting, and another reason why the network delayed the episode, probably because they thought it was a little bit too weird.
yeah, I mean, it's because putting music in like that, I mean,
I found myself thinking like when Cressetti first turns it on, the first thing he landed on, I was like, that sounds good, and then he changed it to something that didn't sound as good. I would have been if I'd been in the squad room. I'd be like, no, go back to the first one.
yeah,
I also
yeah,
thought I liked the dynamic with Bayless and the cleaning lady. Um,
mm,
and one thing that's recurring with Homicide is that often throughout the series, even the smallest characters that you might think are one-off tend to pop back up again. Some of them ending up in very important roles in certain circumstances. But unfortunately, the cleaning lady is not one of them. I don't think she ever showed up again. So I was a little bit let down by that because I think, you know, she and Bayless kind of, there was something there. There was a spark there, and they just
well,
abandoned.
more than a spark.
Yeah.
Bayless was really hot for her.
So yeah, they abandoned that particular line, but yeah, I
Yeah,
liked that part. Bolander's, you know, again, it shows like he's seen as the veteran detective that's seen everything there is to see about homicide and does his job well and all that, but he's uncomfortable by anything that kind of, well, gets him out of his comfort zone.
right, so classic lines like, I mean, this is a classic line. I mean, I don't know if it's been used elsewhere, but Howard V. Munch, I think it was, he wouldn't be my first round draft choice.
Yeah.
And then we've got, and then there's a good bit with Cressetti when he was talking about his young daughter's boyfriend, and he was talking to her on the phone. He said, "I liked him when I first met him. I was just showing him my gun."
Yeah. Yep.
And then the thing, take off that tie, Frank. Um, and then this was a cracking line. When I was young, from Bolander, when I was young, a codependent marriage was a good marriage. No, a codependent relationship was a good marriage.
Yeah.
And then on not having a child, Bolander said, too busy with murders and mortgages.
Mm-hmm.
And then what else have we got? And then he said, because Bolander says he's nearly 50. By the time my kid's in college, I'd be a statistic. And then we have here's a nice bit. Frank says, because it's so hot, the plant died. One night, the plant just shriveled up and died. G said, why didn't you water it? And then the partner of Giavetti says, why don't you water us?
Yeah, Lewis on his way out. It just kind of,
Yeah,
as he's going out, his little side comment, why don't you water us?
yeah. And then then G says, Frank, take off that tie.
Yeah, there's a bunch of that's why it's a great episode to me that there's so many little things that are just little great details and realistic dialogue and um, yeah, it reveals stuff but not too much. It's finding that delicate balance. And the interesting thing is, despite them making comments about how heat makes people more upset and more likely to kill each other, and they're working the night shift where there's more murders, that in the whole episode there isn't a single call that's actually someone reporting a murder. Every call is either a relative calling or somebody calling about the AC or Santa with the gun or the baby or like everything is all related to something else rather than any actual cases coming in.
Well, except for the previous case that happened in
Well, that's what I
episode
mean
two.
is there isn't any actual phone calls that come in. There's no new cases that
Right,
come in.
right, okay.
Actual homicides the whole time. And that may be the only episode in the whole series where that's the case. I can't remember. There may be one or two others, but for the most part, there's always at least one new case in the episode that comes into somebody, even if it doesn't feature as the main thing in the episode. But this one, there's not a single actual new homicide that gets reported. And nobody is seen driving a car. That's another thing that's rare. Almost every episode has at least one scene with two detectives in the car. And those, unlike some television and movies that used some, green screens and fake cars and things, every homicide scene with the car, they're really the camera guy is in the back seat filming the two detectives in the front seat.
Yeah, that's a better way. You don't want it the way it was on Murder, She Wrote, where you can just tell when they're using projection.
Yeah.
People just, and these days, with DVD commentaries, people are just hip to those things, and NTs will notice all that kind of stuff about 10 years before they actually start noticing bad acting.
Well, that actually reminds me. I mean, you don't necessarily have to do a video about it or whatever, but do you want me at some point to play you the commentary on the first episode of Homicide from the DVD? Because I could just play
that'd be
it.
Okay.
Yeah,
that'd be okay.
They don't have commentary on every episode like Doctor Who tends to, and some other shows, The Simpsons does and stuff. But they do. They have them on like certain episodes. So when you were saying that, I was like, oh well. When we get to an episode that has commentary, then I was like, oh yeah, the first episode does.
So The Simpsons has a commentary on every episode. That's a lot of episodes.
They did up until somewhere around like season 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there, they finally had a DVD that did not have commentary on every episode, I think. But I could be remembering wrong. It could be just be that they didn't have Matt Groening on it. Because for the first, 10 seasons plus whatever, Matt Groening, the creator of the show, was on every single commentary. The rest of the people would rotate, but he was always there. And then they finally had some that without him.
And that's the sort of thing, folks, that stops people from from downloading the torrent and just buy the whole DVD because of get the commentaries.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's probably some people uploading those too, but yeah, I was spoiled by Simpsons and Doctor Who for the amount of special features and commentaries and stuff. I just sort of assumed because of how many of those that I watched that all shows did that, and I realized from finally getting some other shows that that's not the case. In fact, the majority of shows don't have that much extra content. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it per season, if you bought a season's worth of Doctor Who DVDs, probably add up to quite a bit of money.
Oh yeah.
Unless, maybe, except that because there were only 4 stories with Pertwee, so you'd only have 4 DVDs then. But some of the other ones would be. Anyway, we are digressing. We did some mega digressions the other day. We got a bit sloppy.
Yeah, back to the Hot Squad room.
Yeah, I think I mentioned the lines. Yeah, because that's one. Yeah, I like the third episode more than the second one. And I rewatched some of the the first half of the first episode. And again, it's just getting used to their accents and the way they talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I like those bits that you were saying from the black guy in the who's running the graveyard, and there's that with the polystyrene styrofoam coffin, and then was it like a hamburger. And nobody stays fat down there.
Yeah, he's got several great lines when they tell him that they dug up the wrong body, and then Lewis says, "If we go to where the other guy was, is there a chance we're gonna find the right person?" And he says something like, "Maybe." And then they're like, "You don't know what you're doing," and he says like, It's like, we can find you someone else. How many do you need? And this is the part where he's still like, even though he's talking to the cops and they're not customers, they're cops. He's still in salesman mode because he's telling them like the coffin he could have used, and he said I could have done it for 2,500. Try to find that for less than $4,000, you know. So he's advertising his services at the same time that he's talking about this cheap woman.
If that's believable, though, that is believable.
Yeah, it's great.
And
I mean,
yeah,
I know people like I work in an office where we have salesmen that come in from time to time, and we have certain people that our boss talks to that are like maintenance people or plumbers, electricians, things like that. And I encounter a lot of people that are very similar to the funeral home guy.
are you? If it wasn't for Ricky Gervais doing The Office, could you have written something based on where you are?
Well, I could still write something based on where I am, but
Yeah.
I don't have to take my cues from no Ricky Gervais.
Now he might be an ENTP, but
I don't know anything about him and don't wish to talk about him right now.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, that's right. For keeping me on a leash. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I shouldn't be talking about him right now. Yes. Terrible.
Well, so I'll ask because we tend to focus on the personality types and stuff. Was there anything in this episode you thought was particularly type revealing of any of the characters? Anything that stood out to you in that way?
It was that bit, that particular line from Munch when he said, "I'm upset because every relationship I think I have is not the relationship I actually have."
Okay.
And that is, in socionics theory, ESTPs and ENTPs are not very good at knowing the status of a relationship that they have with someone. Whereas if we flip it to the opposites of those two types, ISFP and INFP, they're very sensitive to the relationships they have with people.
So, was there anybody that did anything that you felt like you got a further indication, maybe, rather than like, because Munch, you and I both agree it's pretty obvious he's the NTP. Whereas, was there any other characters where there was anything they said or did that sort of, made you, if you felt like was more insight into that character's type?
I liked G. You see, a lot of people who don't know Guardians as well, right, would say that the bit at the end was out of character. With the but they can have a sense of fun once the work's been done. Once the work has been done, they can have a sense of fun.
Yeah, it actually reminded me of the scene in the Shawshank Redemption where the guard gets them beers in kind of the same setting. They're like out on the roof of the prison or whatever. But yeah, it reminded me of that. But yeah, I thought because my initial feeling actually when I was rewatching Homicide and I was kind of thinking of them in Myers-Briggs terms for the first time, my initial thought on Bayless in the beginning was ISTJ because of the by the book mentality and and stuff. And it was actually probably not just Adina Watson, but also an episode like this one where he had the interactions with the mother, and that I saw some of his natural compassion, sort of his softer side and the beginnings of his kind of moral take on things. So I started to see that, and as it develops, further as once you really get a lot of cases with him and Pembleton when they have a lot of exchanges, a lot of times in the car or other places, you get a lot of insight into both of their characters about the way they view the world, and so it really comes to fruition there. But this was sort of the first kind of signs of, both his reaction to Adina Watson's murder, whereas a lot of the squad kind of took that in stride. And of course, some of that is just the rookie veteran thing. They've seen a lot more dead bodies and they're used to horrible things happening. So you say, well, the rookie is a lot more shocked by that. But I also think a part of it is his character and his personality, that he's more likely to have a kind of moral outrage at certain things than some of the other people in the squad are. And I think so that's a factor. Yeah.
You see, usually I don't consider type, because I realize that a lot of times writers will have characters do things because it's necessary for the plot. They're not thinking about, I'm writing a character of a type. I'm writing an individual.
That's what the great thing to me, I mean, one of the many great things to me about Homicide is it seems like they did that, but the actions of the characters are still realistic for the types they seem to be. So whether or not they actually wrote it with that intention, I have no idea if any of the writers and producers, are aware of personality type stuff or whether that factored into them at all. But regardless of whether they did or not, they kept the characters remarkably consistent within the theory in terms of most of what they do. There's not something where something just jumped out at me as, oh, well, an ISFJ would never do X or whatever. Even though, of course, those kind of things are kind of silly anyway, because any type can do any action. But there are certain things that, if they do it, there's got to be like a pretty good reason for it. There's got to be under stress or in a way that, or something that kind of triggers that behavior. And there were very few things in the course of the series that stood out as being like, oh, that seems out of character for that character. Very, very few. I think probably the only ones that were a little bit harder to gauge that way were some of the characters introduced in the last couple of seasons, because they really didn't take the time to develop them as well. Because it was somewhat by network edict, a little bit more plot focused, and you didn't have quite the development on a few of them.
With the ratings going down?
Yeah, they did.
Right. Because otherwise the network would shut up and just say, more please.
Yeah, it went up and down. They had their spikes where they would have, certain episodes that actually in the documentary on the season 6 one, when they talk about the subway episode, they talked about how that episode was being billed as one that could, really, they promoted it heavily, which they complained about. The network didn't promote them well enough over the time, and that was one where they really, made a big deal of it and tried to get a real high audience. And they have in the documentary, as they're looking at the ratings as they come in, after that, that they are disappointed by, what they got, because they were routinely the last place in their time slot, which was Friday nights at 9:00 my time, Central Time. But it wasn't because they were like among the least watched shows. It was because the other shows were just higher, and they were competing. I mean, Fox didn't have any shows in that time slot, so we were competing with ABC and CBS. And ABC had the very long-running news show 2020 in that time slot, which consistently won the time slot. And then CBS had actually more than one thing over the course of the time, but the thing that became the hit show for CBS was a show called Nash Bridges. Had Don Johnson and Cheech Marin.
That was big. They showed that in England.
Yeah, they Homicide made jokes about Nash Bridges more than once. Because and I think there were one or two 2020 jokes too, because so they sort of made fun of their competition, but they were consistently beaten by their competition.
You see, I would think there'd be a crossover audience for the type of people that would watch 2020 and the people that would watch Homicide. That it might be
there might be
taken
some.
from.
Yeah, I think the audience for 2020 is generally skews older. Which is, I mean, true in general of Friday night television tends to be older because younger people.
Friday night, the graveyard night.
There's a higher percentage of younger people that go out Friday nights and aren't sitting home watching TV. Period.
Oh, that shows you the network wasn't that confident in it that they showed it on Friday night.
Okay.
Oh, there. Oh, yeah, I was thinking, you know, when it said promoting it, I would think actually it would be quite a hard series to promote because the things that are going for it are characterization and dialogue. Whereas if it's something that's more action delivered.
That was what the network always used as their excuse. They were like, give us some chase scenes and shoot 'em up stuff, and then we can put that in the ad. And so on the rare occasions they did have episodes that included that, then they did have stuff in the ad. So if you didn't ever watch Homicide and you just watched the promos they did for it, you would think it was like a lot of other cop shows because that was what they chose to focus on. Is that, you know, they'd go, okay, give me this, and let's put the scenes in there where somebody's getting shot or something, you know, and that would be in the promo. And obviously that doesn't reflect the vast majority of the scenes on Homicide. So
one difference they could have made is. You see, it wouldn't have really fit in with the start of the program, and that would be to have a really good-looking woman play Howard, and then make her the focus of the promotion.
Man, don't even get me started on that. So it's really funny for you to say that because it's like this sort of naive take on the. And I'm not calling you naive in general. I'm just saying of the whole mess of Homicide because that element was something that they fought with the network on for 5 years, and the network kept saying, put more attractive women in there, you know, you've only got this, and put Howard in outfits that are make her more attractive, and you know, the whole thing was like, stop being realistic about this character that is not somebody who dresses to try to make people think she's hot.
Just straighten her hair.
What?
Just straighten her hair. Have it less curly.
Why are you saying that?
I just think it looks better with straighter hair.
Well,
but again, it wouldn't have been realistic.
So there you go. Already, you know, I wouldn't have found that more attractive. But the thing is, it's just funny to me that you said it that way because that was a constant battle with the network, and you know.
You see, I'm sort of going off what happened on Battlestar Galactica Mark II, where they made Trisha Helfer, who was a former supermodel, the focus of the advertising campaign.
Yeah.
And everybody else was. What I would have done is, I would have thought, well, we've got loads of really good characterization here, loads of really good dialogue, and I would employ one of the writers, just to be able to put together like a trailer. Because if someone put the time and effort in, you could make that into a good trail, getting all those lines in. I mean, you would be able to do it. From that episode, you would be able to put a load of good lines in and really sell that episode.
Yeah, and I'm sure they had an ad for that episode. It probably focused on G yelling about the air conditioning.
Yeah.
Santa Claus falling through the roof, like, you know.
You could make a really good trailer.
I can imagine without even really remembering what it was, what scenes that they would probably stick in there.
Oh yeah, I mean, you could probably get it about in like a 30-second ad. You could probably get 4 or 5 good lines in about the heat. So
yeah, it would just be like Santa Claus falls through the ceiling, Munch pounds the desk and says, "I hate women." The woman screams, "Somebody stole my baby." G yells about the AC. Yeah, you pretty much, you know, fill it up. Well, I mean, Ned Beatty, like I said, was the most well-known actor in the cast, so they would have had him in there. Probably saying the line about murders and mortgages, because that would be a good thing to stick in there.
Yeah, and the bit and the line, when I was young, a codependent relationship was a good marriage.
Yeah.
But the network might have said, "What did the audience know what codependent means?"
They, on the first season DVD, they did include a few of the promos that they ran, mostly for the first episode, because that one was the highest rated episode ever of Homicide, because they debuted it after the Super Bowl. So whatever show they put after the Super Bowl, because America's a bunch of mindless people who don't know how to turn off the television, they just watch the thing that comes on after the Super Bowl. So the Super Bowl that year had like 93 million people watching or something like that, and the audience for Homicide dropped to like 20-something million. So, but that was the most that ever watched any episode of Homicide, was that first airing after the Super Bowl. So
what was
a ton of people saw that one.
Right, so what was the usually what was the lead-in programming like for Homicide? What was up before it and after it? Because we've talked about what it was up against.
I don't remember, actually. I think it was different over the course. That was part of the problem, is that the rest of the lineup kind of shifted several times. I remember one year there was like game shows. Another year there was other dramas. Sometimes there were sitcoms. So like they were trying to find something that worked on Friday nights, and most of the rest of it wasn't. Eventually, I think they did. If I can't remember now, because Saturday night is generally, you talked about Friday being graveyard, but in America anyway, Saturday is even more of one. It's the night where like lowest TV ratings.
I would have put it on Sunday.
NBC, no, Sunday's one of the highest rated ones.
Yeah, I would have put it on Sunday, because I remember Murder She Wrote being on a Sunday.
But
being
NBC actually found a successful 2 or 3 shows for their Saturday night, and so they actually did better. And then I remember at one point they moved one of those to pre-Homicide to try to bring some of that audience over to Friday, because it was, I can't remember if it was Profiler. There was one called, there were several like one-word titles, and there was one called Profiler, and there was another one that was called like Pretender or something like that, about this guy that like disguised himself as different people or something. I don't remember. I didn't really watch any of them. But and then there was a short-lived show called Man and Machine. Look up that one if you want to someday, because Machine was played by Yancey Butler. She was quite attractive. She was like the android in the duo.
Ooh, now you get me interested.
Yeah, it was a guy named Man and an android chick.
What was that called? What was that?
Man,
start reviewing that one.
Yeah, Man, MANN, and Machine.
Ooh.
Yeah, good luck finding that. I'm sure somebody has it somewhere, but I think that lasted less than a season, if I remember right.
Well, we could review that in future. Just the premise, I mean, all the NT guys, like the INTPs and INTJs.
We could review Sesame Street. When do we start doing that?
Yeah, but I think a lot of INTGs and INTJs go, that sounds like a good premise. Man and Machine.
Yeah, I mean, there's been lots of stuff about that weird science and yeah. So I guess anything else you want to say about Night of the Dead Living?
I've gone through most of the lines. Thing is, at the moment, I'm just rather enjoying it rather than actually thinking about it in type-related terms.
Yeah, well, I understand, because I do the same thing, and just stuff, will kind of naturally pop up from time to time.
Whereas because you've had many viewings before, you've got a little bit more distance. And plus, it's a good sign that you're not actually standing outside of it, that you're involved within it.
Yeah.
Right. What else? I think that's pretty much it.
All right.
Yeah, I like that. Oh yes, I like the fact that early on he talks about how hot it is, and then he turns around and you actually do see sweat on him, on his shirt.
Oh yeah.
On G's shirt. Little things like that.
And they talked about shirts and Bolander's shirt, and doesn't want to figure out the laundromat.
Yeah, that was a nice little thing about where Lewis said that, you know, if you take it to the was it like a charity shop? Yeah. And they'll rinse it. You know, but you take the risk. Yeah, but you see, what they could have asked there was, yeah, but you take the risk of somebody buying it, and then somebody else could have said, yeah, sure. So yeah, but you know, that would have.
And Lewis is the most stylish one of the squad, probably. Well, Pimbleton's pretty good too, but
Lewis both of them are.
Yeah,
very very dapper, Pembleton.
Yeah. They got that SFP sense of style, man.
Oh, there was another good line in there when I think the kid asked Pembleton if he's been arrested. And he said something like, not all black people have been arrested.
Yeah.
Right. Also, like, there were plenty of black people
I thought
that
was actually a great way of doing that, of having the kid be the one that's like, but you're black. What do you mean you've never been arrested?
Yeah, that's exactly what he said.
What do your parents do? He says, I don't know, get arrested.
Yeah. So like I said, so many good lines in it. But I can see how people would say, oh, it drags a bit. But that's just because of what they expect in a crimes.
Yeah, I mean, people that sit around and you know, wait for, like, people to get shot and thrown off buildings and things like that, like, you know, they're going to be disappointed with a majority of Homicide episodes, because there is some of that, but it's not like going to be every episode in your face kind of thing, you know, all the time. So,
and it might be that I can understand what the network is thinking, that as a third episode, you kind of want that more in the middle of the season.
Yeah, well, that out of order thing in season 2, it doesn't really matter that much that they flip, because the episode that they moved to the front. That was actually the fourth. It's really kind of exists as a standalone episode. I mean, I guess it's kind of good if you know the characters a little bit more before they get to that one, but it doesn't matter that much. Then in that case, what the network did was they moved it up because Robin Williams was in it, and they were trying to promote that and get the ratings for that. So,
that's fair enough.
But the third season one was just inexcusable. And again, without revealing, I can just say that there was a major plot development that was just revealed very casually because they ran the episodes out of order, and so you find out something that was supposed to be a big shocking thing to the audience, like 2 episodes before it actually happens, because of the stupid way they decided to broadcast.
Oh, I bet the producers were absolutely furious.
Yeah, if you look at the DVD packages, one of the things it says in big capital letters on the DVD case is, watch the series, or watch the episodes in the order the producers intended. And they leave off the end of that, which is, instead of the stupid way NBC ran them, you know, they leave that to you to add to the end yourself.
So did it actually put it like this? Watch it in the way it was intended, rather than ...
Yeah, no, it doesn't say rather than. It just says, watch the episodes in the order of the series intended. It lets you finish the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
So that's probably it, folks. For
Son of a Gun.
Yeah, and bye-bye, folks.